So how did the media perform? And did self-censorship by the media, or did the media suffer self-censorship? And these are important reflections or important thoughts to ponder on, because then they inform what we do or how the media engages with matters of public interest moving forward. We have with us two panelists. We're supposed to be having four panelists, but for now we have two panelists. Professor Kimani Njogu, who needs no introduction to most of us, is a professor of many years. Let me just read what they're telling me, that he's the director of Twaweza Communications, which is an independent organization, and deals mainly in the areas of language, media, and governance, with a particular interest in dialogic approaches to social change. We also have Rayhab Gachango, who is a communication specialist and a chartered marketer. She has many things that she does. She's a poet, she's a writer, she's a teacher, she's a peer counselor, she's an actor, dancer, and performing artist. Everything around the performing artist or performing arts area, you'll find Rayhab in. And the two of them will be sharing their thoughts on the topic at hand. We'll start with, shall we start with the ladies first? Is that fair, Prof?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, ladies first. Rayhab, please, take it away.
My name is Rayhab. I think he forgot to mention that I'm a blogger. I blog at portentash.com. That's also my Twitter handle. This topic is a very good one. I think we've been wondering what's happening with the media around this particular situation, because especially around the time when the tallying was going on, we were not getting information from the media as to what's really going on. And what happened is that a lot of blogs came up and started giving stories and analysis of what is happening, and there was also a lot of tweets and Facebook posts around that. So for some of us, for me, for example, I do believe that the media abdicated its role in informing the public about what was going on. I think they were caught between a rock and a hard place. They didn't want things to go wrong like in 2007, 2008, and be blamed for inciting people. But at the same time, they didn't do what they're supposed to do, which is their watchdog role.
Rayhab, you do raise a very important question. I think this is a topic that we are asked to discuss. And I would like us to, as we discuss this question, to reflect on a number of points. One, to ask ourselves whether the media was consistent in abdicating its role before March 4th, and whether it abdicated its role on March 4th, and whether it abdicated its role during the tallying period until now. So you can actually, because the election process is still going on. So I think it's important to kind of create that distinction so that we know what times we are talking about. I would also want to, for us to think about whether the watchdog role is context dependent or it is not context dependent. Do media play the watchdogging throughout, the life of the sector, or are there moments where watchdogging is suspended for particular reasons? And if so, what are those reasons? I think if we create this template, general template, it will really help us understand the extent to which media may have relinquished its function as a public watchdog. I'd like to start my reflection, because these are really general reflections. I don't think that the jury is out yet. It's very general reflections. And ask you to recall the article by Michael Holman in the Sunday Nation of the 17th. Now, Michael is a really renowned journalist, and he says that Western journalists anticipated violence that failed to materialize, identified flashpoints that didn't ignite, and were baffled by the bloodshed that never took place. Now, Holman wrote a whole page in the Sunday Nation in which he really created the impression that there were certain expectations of bloodletting in Kenya, and that those expectations were not met. In the process of developing his argument, he talks about foreign missions that had access to information related to the unpreparedness of IEBC. That apparently research had been conducted before March 4th, which suggested that civic education had not been conducted as was supposed to have been conducted, that the digital equipment that IEBC was supposed to use was not in perfect condition, and that this information was available, in foreign missions, and yet it was not made public. So again, we have to ask ourselves, what was going on? Why was there silence, not just within the media sector, but also amongst more foreign missions? Why didn't they make available this information to the media? Before March 4th, media really did try to educate Kenyans. And before March 4th, they participated in watchdogging. Okay. And that is why, actually, we didn't raise questions about, media relinquishing its role on the 1st or the 2nd or the 3rd. I think up till the 4th, we were very happy with the media generally. And I think talking with different people, I got the impression that Kenyans wanted media to be very responsible. On March 4th, I think they really also tried to give us the story. They were dispatched all over the country. They really tried to give us the story. We knew, even before IBC told us, that some of the machines were not working, from reporters reporting from polling stations and so on. I think it is during the tallying period that people started asking questions of the media, because the media seemed to only have one source of news, actually basically two sources. IEBC generally providing all the information that the media carried, as well as the commentary from the studios. I think there are many scholars who were invited to the studios to give analysis. And most of it was actually quite speculative, and so on. And therefore, during the period of tallying, I think we didn't get diversity in terms of news sources. We didn't get diversity in terms of, information related to technology. And there was really very little investigative work that was done by the media around that period. In fact, I was personally shocked when the CEO of IEBC asked whether there was anybody to ask him a question. And I think it was Professor Oluenyo who stood up and asked a question. Nobody else, no journalist, was courageous enough, I think again in quotes, to ask the CEO the question. Okay, after the tallying and the matter moved to the Supreme Court, have the media functioned as watchdog? I think so. I really think so. I think that the stories that are coming out of the sector suggest a certain inquisitiveness, a certain pursuit of truth, and we can see more diversity in terms of the stories that we are getting, So, in my view, I think it is, we are not able to say that media are in bed with government or the state totally. I'm not even sure that media are in bed with IEBC. I would say that media have functioned at different levels, in different ways to fulfill their obligation. I think so. The extent to which they succeeded or failed is, of course, an area of interesting research. And I would also want to pose the question, because before I hand over this to the moderator. Is watchdogging a context-dependent function of media? And I would like to suggest that actually watchdogging is context-dependent. There are moments when watchdogging becomes extremely urgent and critical. There are other moments when much more competing, responsibilities of the media, especially in states that are in transition, such as Kenya, that watchdogging function can be momentarily suspended for some other collective good. Now, who defines what's the collective good? I mean, I wouldn't know, but I would suggest that around election time, media felt, again, media not being homogeneous, some of the media being owned by politicians and so on, paying homage to capital and so on. But generally, media felt that there was a bigger responsibility to the country, especially local media, domestic media, and that responsibility was to hold the state together, a state that was very, very fragile, very, very, really on the verge of collapse. And that's, and that media felt that this other responsibility of holding the country together superseded the responsibility of providing critical analysis of the tallying process and the electoral process. I mean, really, and again, these are very provisional thoughts on my part, but they do provide my general view about the media role.
Thank you, Prof. Rayhab, do you want to chip in?
I want to comment about that, about the media trying to keep the people together. I'm wondering whether that really was supposed to be the role of the media, because I, for one, have had a concern since the 2007-2008, when we had the agreement that people would share power. The issues were not dealt with. What caused the violence was not dealt with. So what has been happening is that we've been sitting on a time bomb, and then now these elections come about, and because we want to keep the peace so much, we have given the responsibility of keeping the country together to the media, which is not the job of the media. So the media is actually taking a role that the government should have actually taken. The government should have done something. I think, for example, in some of the places where there was post-election violence, there was counseling, and different communities got to sit together and say what their issues were. But for example, in Nairobi, that did not happen. So we all went around behaving like, everything is okay, like we have collective amnesia. But now when the elections came, that's when guys are like waking up and they're like, oh, there might be violence. So the media is put in this role where instead of trying to be a watchdog, the media ends up trying to be the peacemaker and trying to keep people together. So it's like, if there are questions, let's not ask them, because it might cause people to react. So I do think that they are one of the stakeholders and they should have done something, but I don't think the idea of keeping the peace should have been the main thing that the media should have been doing. That's my thoughts on that.
The media abdicated its role, did what it ought not to have done, failed to report, if I hear Rayhab correctly, and generally did other people's jobs. On the other hand, is that the media's role is context dependent, and that given the point at which our country finds itself in history, the media did what it ought to have done, weighed its options, and determined that depending on what and how we behave, we could either ban the country or the country will remain together. And I think they chose the latter, which was to say, okay, guys, let's do what will keep the country together. Now, we have media professionals in the room, and we have observers as well. We have people who work in the university, we have students, we have different people from different backgrounds. What are your thoughts on this?
To perhaps make a distinction between factual reporting of information, analytical contributions of their own staff, such as we saw from Githongo and Nation yesterday, and third, opening up their media to the kinds of commentaries that Professor Kimani referred to. I know it's different between print and electronic, but I just think before we begin to examine the performance of media, we need to categorize these different sort of sections of content before we can evaluate how they perform that role more generally.
So, for instance, with regard to factual content, we are asking the media to undertake investigative reporting. We are asking them basically to do the research that will allow them to come up with the content that is not speculative, that's actually based on facts, you know. And so then we ask ourselves, given the time, given that 1 week, was it possible to run around and collect the data that is necessary to allow for us to see the extent to which media is being truthful, you know, is being accurate in terms of, and less speculative? Because there is always the danger of speculation, which is seen as watchdogging, really. And yet it is just a speculative. And the danger with that type of speculative exposés is that if later people realize that actually there was no exposure, it does so much damage to the industry that the media would take forever to recover. So to what extent do we want to encourage, you know, our media to be speculative, to be non-factual, and so on, you know? And to what extent actually do we want to ask the industry to invest in investigative journalism, which then gives us the factual information with which now we can run? Of course, in terms of diversity of commentary, you know, we didn't see a lot of that, unfortunately, again, in virtually all the media houses, especially electronic media. The same team that was on air on the 3rd continued as the same team that was air the whole week, basically providing analysis. And quite often, it was really almost a replay of, you know, of their own positions, which are publicly known positions. I know that we did try to plug into one of the media houses, and we were told, personally I was told, because I wanted to plug in, I was told that you cannot, because you are not pre-qualified by media owner. You are not pre-qualified to participate in a commentary by the media owner. So it seems as if there was also pre-qualification for commentaries and so on. Which is also quite dangerous for us. In terms of analysis, again, very, you know, especially the opinion pieces and so on, I would assume that those are positions of individual journalists, are not necessarily the position of the particular media house, and therefore we cannot claim that the media house is diverse in its position to the extent that we do not see those positions, that diversity in the editorial pages and so on. So in my view, I think that I agree with you, Tom. It's really investing more in investigative journalism and factual journalism and moving much more away from speculative pieces that hype up emotions and create the aura of watchdogging, but which could be eventually very detrimental to the sector if, for example, the speculation is proved to have been wrong and unfounded.
Thank you, Prof. Talking about diversity, it would be also interesting to hear what sort of diversity as viewers, as consumers of media content, we would have been seeking to see. So then that way, then we can be able to help. Yes, Alex.
I want to thank the panelists, Rayhab and Gachango and Professor Kimani for their valuable contribution. I quite like the divergent views. Now, I'm a known critic of the media, at least in the past. So I think for this one instance, I feel I do deserve to give the media a clean bill of health and commend them for the wonderful job they did. And I think our discussion or this conversation, the way I've read it in the press, and I think the way we're also looking at it here, is I find it fundamentally good on one aspect. That it's looking at this as an event, the event of covering the elections. And it's missing out on something. It's missing out on, let me pass a quick judgment on how the media covered this event. So what is failing is to interrogate the role of the media in the 2007-2008 violence elections, the series of events leading to, before leading to the election itself, and also it's the paralysis that gripped the media houses as a result of the civil war, what we call the civil war that erupted. Now, journalists were traumatized. I don't know if you know this, but I was part of a team that I mentioned with a lot of commendation to Media News. A workshop was held at the Nairobi hotel to counsel journalists who are traumatized by covering the bloodletting that was happening in the country. Nobody told the journalists, they could start it, but these are news that never makes to the news because they're not becoming journalists. So even the journalists themselves, they were never faced by such situations. And therefore, the other point we fail to see is, this key fails to see is to also look at what the media's realization of better than could have been coverage of that process leading to the election and the aftermath could have saved a greater national good of keeping the nation together. We do recall that when they got united finally with realization and had common headline, Kenya is one, let's save the country. Because they realized that there's something they could have done better, they were doing that as an intervention. And I think it also contributed to at least calming down the situation. Now, we also have to take stock of events and developments that have happened in the media industry, professional growth since then, and certain policies and processes implemented within media houses to ensure a repeat of the same does not have, including the media itself, the country and also the media. We also fail to look at the growth of the media profession in terms of abiding, at least to the principles and the values that on the second schedule of the Media Act 2007 on professionalism. A lot of journalists prior to that never knew they even existed, but I think the sensitization that happened since then has made a lot more journalists aware about the values that is they are published by the Media Council of Kenya on the second schedule. In my view, this event fails to see the cumulative effect of the 5 years of learning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning of what the media performed, and therefore the corrections and the remedies they put in place. So therefore, I am quick to say, or rather my considered view, is that as we highlight the concerns that we may have, because it's public, we are again entitled to make comments on media, and I'm one of them, I think we should also highlight the concerns and also help the media understand how they could do, we put proposals, how we think that everything that maybe they didn't do right, how they could have done better. Because I do believe there are different two types of people. There are problem announcers and solution providers. So let's align ourselves to the solution providers part of that. So thank you. My name is Alex Gakuru. I have been involved in the media, in ICT policy, media, law and regulations processes since 2004. And my specific interest has always been on consumer protection, especially in the digital information communication realm. So matters of media, ICT, law and regulations have been of extreme interest to me. Thank you.
The country has not moved. The media moved. That's what Alex is telling us. And when the media moved and decided to act on the knowledge that they had, it's like the country expected them to behave as they did 10 years ago. Interesting comment. Yes, madam.
My name is Kentis Tikolo. I'm the chair of the Public Relations Society of Kenya, and I was involved in the piece campaigns during the elections. While on the one hand, the media toned down on pushing up emotions, I stand to accuse the media of not coming out with the truth. Nobody asked them not to give the truth. If you look at the context of the last election where we had violence, it gave rise to a constitution which we sought to try and implement. And I expected the media to be the watchdog that ensured that the constitution was followed to avoid a similar state as we had in 2007. But most important, I feel the media would have done a lot to avoid the stalemate that we are in at the moment. I want to quote the Sarah Elderkin article where she pointed out the demonstration that the media was given on the PDR kits, the voter identification kits, where the media were taken through a demonstration and 4 out of 5 gadgets that were tested failed. We never saw the media take that up. And especially in the backdrop of another article that had been written by Ahmed Nasir, where there were issues about procurement of those voter identification kits. That's just one item. Now, for the media to come up with the articles we are seeing after the election, after things have gone into court, to point out irregularities that are so, glaring, and that after those 2 articles, I think is absolutely irresponsible. It points to a media that was either sleeping on the job or a media that was compromised. And that is what is coming out. I am watching to see, it will be very, very interesting, to see if the media has the same tallies from the various polling stations as the IEBC. That would be a very interesting analysis for somebody to come up with. I'm not surprised that the media is not giving us figures from the different polling stations. Again, that points to a media that is either sleeping on the job or cowed down or sleeping in the state. I would love to see that being addressed in your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It will be interesting to hear from media practitioners in the House, and I've seen a few, how we then differentiate, and probably Prof. Rayhab, you also, particular Prof, you want to comment on it. Where do we put do we draw the line between commentators and columnists and your news reporters as well as your analysts? It will be interesting to see, so that then when you're looking at the media, then you know what are you looking at. I see senior colleague Frank is also in the House. It will be interesting to hear some of his comments. Yes.
So I don't think I can go on.
Yes, please. You're a Kenyan, aren't you?
Yeah.
Please, an observer.
This sounding belaboring the point that Antigolo is saying, I think we need to be bolder than just put it. If you were to analyze the whole scenario, certain power barons, so to speak, learned lessons from 2007, 2008, and you would conclude that they went on to do their homework well. And where they seem to have thoroughly worked would be the media. And the question of ownership here arises. We know if we live in this country, so we can come up with the conclusions based on perception. We call them allegations. But then to allege sometimes is also a right, anyway. The right, freedom of allegation. I think that should be a constitutional right. Now, let's go to the point. You look at the Observer Group. We were at the Githongo in one of the sessions. there was a consortium of various bodies concerned with elections. Then they came up with a position. We were there when they were presenting the reports. And we were surprised at the speed at which they were doing things. To the extent that when the elections were being announced, their results were already out as well, corroborating whatever was being announced. We were brought together, we were shown some arbitrary figures, percentages. If you look at the media, you have a feeling that, as she says, they were either led by the North, because the IBC told them that we are going to give you the electronic transmission, so you should not go on the ground, and they bought into the whole idea. To the extent that when the system was reported to have collapsed, they had no recourse. There is nothing they would do. Or the media deliberately went to sleep with the state. This is an allegation.
Okay,
so I think the Kenyan media stands accused at some point. If they cannot come out and give us some figures, if the media cannot come out and give us some figures, or tell us why they don't have the figures, allegations will fly around.
Thank you, Clement.
My name is Cynthia Maina. I'm a student at the University of Nairobi. And I'm hearing all this talk about the local media, and so many issues have been raised. But I want to get Professor Kimani's opinion on the international media. You mentioned Michael Holman and what he wrote and what the international media was expecting. They were expecting anarchy, and they were expecting us to fight, they were expecting violence. Some of them were even, leaning towards that. And also, the second problem I have is that I've also read another book Michael Holman wrote, Last Orders at Harrods, and I feel, as a local person, that the depiction that we're given as Kenya, or fictional world, whatever, is not the same picture that we're portrayed in the international media. So I wanted to get your opinion.
What's the picture that you get? Just so that we get it clear.
Unrealistic.
Unrealistic.
Picture, yes.
Okay, unrealistic picture. The gentleman at back.
My name is Twaweza, and I had a quick point about this division between what is a professional journalist and versus a blogger. Is that if you're a blogger, then you're not really capable of analyzing the issues objectively, and I find that to be incorrect, because from what I've read, the analysis was much better on the part of bloggers presenting issues and analyzing those issues in such a way that was more credible than the professional journalists that we have here. So, if we could address the question you had for the panel with respect to that division between what is a professional journalist versus a blogger in your response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let one of the media practitioners answer me that. Are they bad, or is there a limit to this information? It's like when they're trying to report these things, they have a limit, they read some place and it's like they don't want to adjudicate the truth. It's like they are bad by someone. Are they bad, or is it just them who don't stand to the truth?
The media in Kenya, it's a tradition that they look for hard news. But this time, there was a problem, and we knew there was a problem. Because most probably, perhaps, suppression by the ICC issues, because of the issue itself, they think that once they come out here and tell us the truth, then something will be bound to them. So, in such cases, what is going to happen in the next election? Are we going to be hearing the same thing? I'm Joya from ICRC, and also a student at the University of Nairobi.
Joy. Thank you, Joy. Tom.
Yes, I'm Tom Wolf. I do research for Ipsos Synovate. Also in this discussion, it's already been done, but just to be clear, I think it's useful to make a distinction in media reporting between the integrity of the electoral process, the actual votes cast in terms of especially the reporting as from the time the results were received, in terms of analyzing the outcome, analyzing voter behavior, which includes both the distribution of votes between the candidates in different races, as well as voter turnout, and the process of voting, whether spoiled or rejected ballots. And then the third area that people have mentioned already, the response of the public in terms of stability, cohesion of the country, and so on. So any thorough analysis of media performance, I think, would need to address each of those, and maybe there's some others I'm forgetting. But because no one has mentioned it, just with regard to the reporting analysis of the results as they were coming in, I was shocked, although I participated in two networks coverage, I won't mention them, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I couldn't watch all the channels at once, there was no media house that was set up to analyze the results as they were coming in, especially from specific constituencies or even polling stations, that would give an early indication of the trend in terms of this combination of turnout and the distribution of votes. And since Linus has just walked in, I will underscore the point that Nation Media House equally failed, but he can correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm sure he'll be happy to do so. Because it would have been very easy if you look at election night or post-voting coverage in any advanced political system with free media, you will see even before the polls close, in fact, even before election day, there will be a list of particular parts of the country or constituencies that the media analysts are going to be looking at from the moment the results come in to indicate which way the country is going, or which way that election is going. Because they've used either political scientists from universities, research institutes, or their own in-house capacities to say these are the 10 or 12 or whatever they are election areas in the country that are going to give us an indication, and then as the results come in, using computer programs, they continue to fine-tune. There seemed to be a total reluctance of media houses to say, we've got in now 25 constituencies, this is what we had expected, this is what we're actually seeing, and this tells us who the winner is likely to be, and we'll be correcting that with each additional result that comes in. I didn't see any of that. To analyze, now this is aside from the integrity of the electoral process, I didn't see any of that, and I consider that to be a major failure just in analytical terms, leaving aside these questions of cowing and so on, but I stand to be corrected because, as I said, I could not watch 24 programming on all channels at once.
Dr. What difference would you have been seeking in the event that you saw what you're asking for? How different would that have been for you if you had seen what you're saying? What would have been different?
Well, I think there's two main issues, and I'll ask other people to comment.
Yes, please.
First of all, given the very even division in all four major company opinion polls, the last one that were released, that showed not only were the two main candidates in a statistical tie, but that neither one looked likely to be able to get a first-round victory of 50%. That was the baseline. I'm not saying that these polls are 100% correct, of course they're not, but that would have been a baseline against which, as these results were coming in, they could have begun to interrogate the results in terms of why are we seeing higher turnout in, for example, central Kenya than we are in Ukambani, and what is the implications for the result? Because aside from just attracting viewers and so on and so forth, I view the opportunity, and I think all my colleagues at media would agree in principle, this is an absolutely critical and beautiful opportunity for civic voter political education, to understand our society in terms of electoral behavior. Where are people voting and where are they not? Is the MRC really having a major impact on turnout at the coast, for example? And if the coast is supposed to be an ODM or a Court or Raila stronghold, why are his margins not as high as certain others here? And begin then to interview people on the ground and so on and so on, to actually use that election reporting process as an opportunity for national political education.
Thank you, Dr. Your point is that there was no science used by Linus and company.
I only said that because he walked.
Yes, and on that note, we welcome Linus Kaikai into the house.
By the way, just as a personal comment, I thought the analytical coverage on NTV with Linus was the best by far.
Thank you. And you're not saying that because you're seeing it. And you're not seeing anybody else here. Thank you, Dr. I just want to bring Linus up to speed, just so that then he can be part of the discussion as well. But so far we've got two views that have been held by the panel in front. One is that the media dropped the ball completely and absolutely. And the second one is that it was contextual, that the watchdog role is dependent on what is obtaining at every moment in history. So those are the two views that are held. They're a very interesting group, have very differing views, but generally that from Madam Tikolo and others, Tikolo from Public Relations Society of Kenya, that the media simply failed this republic. And on that note, Linus, let's just welcome Linus to make a few comments.
I came here without a jacket for a good reason. I expected a contest and a fight. That's why my jacket is not here.
That's why you.
And clearly, and I followed my answer for this. The media has clearly been under the spotlight after the election. And one of our own, Michaela Wrong, wrote an article that suggested that we failed. And there's been a debate on whether Michaela was wrong or indeed she was right. Personally, I am 50-50. I don't know where the +1 would be, whether it's right or wrong. But I think it is a valid question. And indeed, this is a welcome discussion just to analyze how the media performed. But I want to say this. The media in this country was operating under a very delicate context. The weight of the events of 2007, 2008 are still, the burden is still very heavy on the shoulders of not just the media, but all the stakeholders in the electioneering process in this country. That was the context. What I can admit is maybe the media was overcautious. Maybe the media was overcautious. Number two is another admission from where we stand as well and where I was during this process. We over-trusted the IEBC. We simply thought that if the IEBC, the precursor IIEC got it right in the 2010 referendum and a number of other constituencies, the level of competence it had demonstrated was very encouraging. But we're here today because I think we trusted, and wrongly so, that the IEBC would be able to deliver. The IEBC has not delivered, and everyone is looking around and saying, where were you, the watchdogs? Why did you keep your eyes off the ball? I want to admit that is the ball that we kept our eyes off. That is the IEBC. We thought the IEBC was on top of things. Clearly, it is emerging it wasn't. Those are the two issues. That is the context under which we operated. But I found Tom making some very pertinent issues in terms of just how we performed in delivering the entire result. I can assure you the desire and dream of any television station, if I am to speak for TV first, is to be able to call an election. It's to be able to call an election. What we normally do in every election, what a media house, a TV station especially, would do is to prepare the what we call bumpers, the end board of so-and-so elected president. So your guess is right on what bumpers or endboards we had that night. We had one that said Raila Odinga elected president with a big tick. We had another one written Uhuru Kenyatta elected president with a big tick. There'll be no prizes for guessing. We didn't have any other boards, not even for Kiapi or Dida, as much as they were doing very, very well. We had those two boards. And then the question becomes, at what point do you use it? If you remember, the events of that night were totally complicated. We relied again, if Tom, you watched up to the last minute, we relied again on the IEBC. And when the IEBC said, okay, we are not announcing the rest of the results until tomorrow 11 a.m., I called the night. I even told my analysts, let's meet here tomorrow morning to carry on the process. Now, how we intended to do this was to call once it became apparent from the results given by the IEBC. But I know how it works elsewhere. We all remember the coverage of the US elections recently, last year, say by CNN. John King was working on the touch screen, which had a lot of information. And I'll come to where the challenge again lies in the question Tom is raising, where he could actually look at the polling stations that are yet to come through in Florida and said, Florida is actually tilting Obama. This is long before the results are out. Now, where are we? Which stage are we in as Kenyan media? We still have a problem because, look at the court even right now, we don't know which voter register to use, for example. IEBC is clueless on that. The judges are also asking, the lawyers don't know. That is where we are. Just the basics of getting the correct database. We, for example, have worked for months with the IEBC trying to tell them, give us the database so that we have a uniform database, so that nation doesn't have one, citizen have another one, IEBC has another one, because that's what's happening right now. You're not sure which one to go with. So in the event that all these things come together, the database can be put together that is uniform right across the industry. It's so easy for us to go to Tharaka Nithi, for example, when all the polls have closed in other places, and tell it very easily that this one is going the Jubilee way. So we were handicapped. But I want to say the media right across the industry has done an incredible job this time than any other election. Let's not forget, let's not just emphasize the lapses in the end, but also the entire journey that includes the move to organize the presidential debates, which was entirely a media initiative. So there were those areas, and I've admitted there are two things that we need to attribute the failures to. One is the context. 07, who will pull the trigger in 2013? The media was determined not to be the one to take the blame this time if anything goes wrong. Number two, over-trusting the IEBC. We thought IEBC knew what it's doing. As it is emerging, IEBC was clueless. We do have election coverage policies as different media houses, but on a number of issues we cooperated. I want to admit here, maybe you do not know, that on the election night there were killings in Mombasa that happened, carried out by the MRC or suspected MRC. That piece of information was out by 2 a.m. towards the morning of the election day. By 2:30, we were making calls to each other on how to handle this. Editors, let me be very clear, editors, journalists, not media executive, not the owners. The owners do not know about this. This was editors. Because we had the option of saying, do the normal thing. It is information out there. Put it out. We agreed we are not going to give first priority to that incident, the killings in Mombasa. This is what would have typically happened. The polling stations open at 6. So what will happen is all our stations will then start with the information that there were killings in Mombasa. What would that have done to the entire mood of the country? It would give this impression that, oh, this is terrible, what a start. So for the first time, we go down to managing release of information. That is the only one we managed. The rest, including results, failure of the electronic tallying, we reported as it happened. Although detecting was a bit of a problem, we didn't detect early enough that indeed the electronic tallying had stalled. We had to repeatedly make inquiries from the IEBC for that admission to come through. So all the decisions that were made were entirely editorial, made by journalists who were conscious of the context, and number two, were conscious of their own role as independent journalists.
A couple of points that members of the audience raised. Professor, you want to respond?
Let me give her a chance first.
Okay, there was a question that was asked that she should have been here to answer, so let me ask it on her behalf. Ms. Sikolo said that there was a media briefing or something like that where BVR kits were tested and 4 out of 5 didn't work. That was before the election. So she has this feeling that already before the elections you already failed the people, because you should have talked about that and you didn't. So maybe if you could address that question first of all.
Right. We actually did question the failure of the BVR kits. The testing was done at Kasarani, the Moi International Sports Stadium. There was an area where they had stored these things. The IEBC demonstrated, and then some of them actually malfunctioned on the spot.
4 out of 5.
Yes, and the explanation was they just arrived. It could be about humidity. That's what they... Humidity could have caused it to jam. The whole story that it had worked in Nigeria, in Ghana very, very well, we again trusted the IEBC on this. The other thing was access to the data on the 24th. It wasn't possible. Again, they said, give us a few days, it will work. We're still waiting.
Thank you. Trusting the IEBC, right? Prof.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Linus. And I think that, again, you see, the way you solve a problem is by looking at the data. And here we are really talking about, in very, very general terms. So it's very important to do really a content analysis of what media did and didn't do, because I recall that the media did actually question the preparedness of IEBC early on. Maybe within civil society we never picked that, but I think it was reported. I think it's also important to mention that with regard to the Mombasa killings, the framing, the media apparently took the position that you frame it as a criminal activity other than an election-related, killing. So again, this was a decision that was made. And I want to go back to, again, even just looking at watchdogging historically, and whether or not, in fact, there are moments where there are competing interests and competing forces, and whether it's advisable, to suspend for a moment certain action on the part of the media, and then resurrect it at the appropriate moment. Because I have this feeling that certain decisions were made in the hope that if they are not resolved during on the March 4th or during the tallying, they will be resolved at the Supreme Court or whatever. But anyway, is it even possible that actually the decision to use the manual was arrived at by IEBC on the 24th of February as backup? I mean, I have no idea. So let's go back to some of the questions that I want to maybe Alex. yes, a lot of work has been done within the industry in terms of internal self-reflection, in terms of enhancing professionalization within the industry, and a certain consciousness of NCIC, you know, that they are being monitored by NCIC, they are being monitored via satellite, they are being monitored by very, very many people, and that did contribute to the self-censorship. International media, I have a lot of respect for international journalists. I have a lot of respect. I think they are able to get the story out of our borders to the global space. But again, I want to associate myself with the sentiments of Holman that actually there was expectation of extensive violence in this country and that the story had already been written. It's just that it had to be thrown to the dustbin. The story was written before the election that Kenya would actually explode. I know that most of our development partners, you know, were not in Kenya on March 4th. I think they took a week before, they took time off to Tanzania and Uganda and organized conferences in Europe and the United States so that when the country burns, they are not within. Therefore, there was that huge expectation of violence, really. International journalists, I think they got it wrong this time round. You remember the CNN footage and so on. I don't believe that that story which came out of CNN was actually a true story. Again, I have no evidence. I would love to go back to the Nation newspaper and the clips on NTV, NKTN, and the Standard to see whether questions were asked, you know, by the journalists, so that we move away from this very, very high speculation that maybe they were not as professional as they should have been. There's a lot of room for work in terms of training, in terms of investment by the media owners, do the investigative story, and so on. And how do we get the media owners really to put in the money for that story? The professional journalist versus the blogger, that the story came out of the blogs and not from mainstream media. Again, that is contestable. It is true, I saw a lot of very interesting, in fact, including Kwa's piece yesterday, you know, which really gives a lot of interesting analysis of what may have happened. Again, you know, without looking down upon the blog world, I think it's a very important sphere. It does guide the mainstream media. It does sometimes open up possible areas of following the story. But I would still want to suggest that mainstream media does introduce a certain amount of caution that you don't find in the blogs or generally in social media. And therefore, that level of caution is a consequence of certain professional awareness and the training and so on. And just to continue encouraging, you know, the media in its diversity to continue working, the blogging to continue, and the mainstream media to continue, but to be aware that none is superior to the other, and that, you know, we should not assume that the blog is superior to mainstream. No, my view really again is, was the media bought? Did it play into power, or was it very personal decisions based on content, on context? I really would like to believe, I truly want to believe that it was more of caution other than a deliberate manipulation by outside forces. It is quite possible that there was an element of that, but I want to retain faith in the sector, and part of that faith has to do with the belief that there are professionals in the sector who make professional decisions, weighing, you know, the context and the ramifications of their decision. And that even where, for example, a particular media house comes out very strongly in support of a particular presidential candidate, that the journalists in that media house still went ahead to reach out to diversity in terms of opinion and commentary. Therefore, I want to suggest that there is professionalism and that we need to continue growing, the industry, even despite its weaknesses.
Thanks, Prof. I want to have another round of comments from the audience. But before that, Rayhab, blogosphere, he said he doesn't want to look down upon. Is that what he did?
No, I don't think he looked down upon us. I do want to make a statement. Some bloggers did receive training also alongside media. For example, the Bloggers Association of Kenya did get training from Article 19 and also from Ushahidi, Uchaguzi on how to actually report on what was going on. The problem, I think, also with some of the blogs is they are also, like media stations, they are also affiliated to certain politicians. So one of the issues I have with the media, I don't have an issue with their peacemaking role, but I have an issue with the fact that because there was a vacuum of news, blogs and social media ended up trying to create news which ended up hyping the situation. Whereas if we had had news from the formal news channels, there were all these conspiracies you walk around and you hear, these things, they've been rigged, and these stories were everywhere. And when you're not getting this information from a formal source, and there are enough bloggers who have formal qualifications, or even if they don't have formal qualifications, have had training, because this issue, a lot of people didn't want the same situation to come up in blogs that these guys were trying to prevent. Because there are blogs that have followings, and some of the things that people say can really...
And they're not necessarily speculative,
yes.
Fact-based.
Some of them are very fact-based.
Thanks, Rayhab.
When it comes to mainstream, the threshold is higher.
True.
It's much, much higher. In the social media, and I say this with a lot of respect to bloggers, the threshold is much, much lower. You can say something and correct it later with very, very minimal consequences. With us in mainstream, you say something that is not yet ascertained, and doing that will take you maybe eternity. It can cost you entire in terms of your credibility and in terms of your future place. So there's that big difference that we need to always mind. And then what again is the challenge that bloggers face is the regular internet user. Some of them who put in things that are totally unconfirmed, and then they'll be lumped together in that particular space. We are not yet where, for example, the US is, where Huffington Post is a very respected blog. You can actually go there for breaking news. So let's be patient with each other as well in terms of how far we've gone and recognize how far we've grown as a country.
My name is Nicholas. I'm a researcher doing my PhD on journalism in Kenya with the London School of Economics and Political Science. And I'm actually at the moment doing some research into the media coverage of the elections. I'm speaking to journalists and editors to understand, rather than look at what we saw, look behind the scenes of the decisions that were made, what was communicated to the journalists, what was going from journalists' heads, unraveling some of that. And I think the failures that you indicated are consistent with what I've seen so far. But there's something a little bit more behind that, and I'd like to inquire with you about that. In fact, I'm hoping to interview you with that.
Sure.
One of the things that's coming out from my interviews is that there was in the media houses a decision, and I'm not saying where it was made, but to be more cautious, as you say, about single source stories. And that is, the MO of the Kenyan media to run a single source story based on political figures, maybe even accusations by political figures, and then the next day the right response is given to the other side. That MO was seen as potentially too inflammatory in this very delicate moment. And, I think the media does have a responsibility to do no harm. That's one no doubt the national media plays an important role. So my question to you is, is it true that there was in the Nation Group a decision not to run single source stories, and given the silence of the IEBC, they would not respond to these accusations, given the silence of civil society groups actually, that it's not just the media's fault alone, but this decision in the context of lots of silence.
We've had the question, Nicholas. Thanks. I just want to accommodate Asimo.
Thank you. My name is Shaya. I'm a former scholar. Usually I agree with Dr. Professor Fandi, so it's an interesting question. I myself disagree with him on so much. But I just wanted to clarify that he was implying that the media does not have the professional expertise, resources, and support to fulfill the watchdog role in certain critical contexts. And then what is the implication when the media does not? Because I think your argument was that in terms of what Tom did in terms of content analysis, that the media could not do certain things because there was this role that others had abdicated. I think we talked about the state, for instance. Therefore, the media stepped into that role. And I think there's a false dichotomy between peace and truth. That we think, I think, for me, what I was hearing, if I got Alex right, is that there is a space where the media should have sat and said, this is what we are going to have to do. Here are all the things we are going to have to do. And this is what we are going to need to be able to do it. And therefore, put in place those resources, knowing that this was coming up. And also educate the public so that people know the difference between, I found it very useful, the analysis that Tom gave in terms of the different content. So I guess the question I'm asking all of you is, what happens when media abdicates its role for good reasons? Because what happened in this particular case is one consequence I'm hearing is that social media stepped in, has become very good at it, but then there are also questions arising with that. And then the other question I also want to ask is, shouldn't we also be identifying, I think Linus did a good job of doing this, and saying you cannot isolate the media. Who else must we bring into this discussion so that going forward, we're not only talking about the media, but the role of the electoral bodies, the role of the state. I think it's interesting that we're all not talking about the media is saying we have to keep the peace because the state seems to have it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nyambura Githongo. I am an independent communications consultant, but I am coming to this session and came into these elections as the person who ran ECFM's news team in the 2007 general election. So when we're talking about context and the trauma that arose out of what we saw in 2007, please let us not even for a moment underestimate the impact of that in 2013. I would attribute, or just in that moment of hesitation, do I say this or not, to that trauma.
We know some.
Now, when we talk about whether the media has been compromised, whether journalists have been bought and so on, I think it's actually very narrow-minded in terms of the view, because the media is not homogeneous. Yes, there are those who are compromised, and then there are those who are not. There are those who are passionate and committed to what it is that they're doing, and there are those who are not. Okay, so let us not even for a moment think that we can use these blanket statements to destroy the media. In terms of the numbers, I am glad that Linus brought up the issue of trusting the IEBC. My question is, even having seen some of the issues that came up with the media, why did you trust? Do we not? Why? I mean, it really does not make sense, especially because we did see where the hiccups had risen. And obviously, the battle of 2007. So in 2013, really, I don't think, in all sincerity, that is entirely excusable. I think, in summary, what I would like to just address is the overall media culture in Kenya, where we cannot go through 2007, deal with the trauma of that, or not deal with the trauma of that, sort of have this hiatus in between, and then come into another election and expect us to perform better. There needed to have been certain conversations that were carried out the entire 5 years in between to make sure that 2013 ran better than 2007.
The media is the fourth estate. During the Italian session, the questions were asked whether there was any question from the media. We saw some politicians and we saw some some other people, some other persons asking those, answering those questions. What will happen? Because everybody is asking, Kenyans are depending on the media to be the watchdog. But at the international press conference, not a single local journalist asked a question, and we can even our colleagues who are foreign journalists did not ask questions. What went wrong? And then, from experience we've had since 2007, I covered it at the KCC, among others. We saw what happened. At the KCC, we had those machines that never worked. They never worked. At the KCC, the media houses also had their own handling centers, which also collapsed. I mean, we learn every day. What happened this time around? That we had the experience from 2007, now these machines were being bought. But also some, they brought here, they never worked almost from day one, and then the video did not even raise it.
Thanks. Thanks, Odhiambo. In fact, additional to this question, there was a question earlier, Linus, for you and possibly for anybody else who's from any newsroom. Was there independent tallying by the media houses? There are results that you guys have kept to yourselves. That Kenyans would like to know the difference between the information that you had and what IEBC relayed finally. Hassan. Hassan.
In that position. Nonetheless, let me agree with one thing, that coming into 2013, the media were severely, extremely restrained lot. And the way Linus has said, we didn't want to be the ones to pull the trigger. But that does not mean we didn't know that things would go wrong. Because all the way prior to March 4th, we had the information that things were not going wrong, or things were not going right. But we wanted, I think this time what we did, and maybe let me explain to those people who are asking the question that were we bribed or were we cajoled into some corner? No. Nowadays this is what we call crusade journalism, and this is what we attempted this time round. Because the first thing we realized that in 2007, where the problem came is that it began by calling into question the credibility of ECK. And it had begun as early as August 2007. And the media was awash with how ECK would not deliver. So this time around we say that maybe let us give IEBC the space to prove themselves. And actually we really did our level best to ensure that the credibility of IEBC remains intact. And the way Linus has said, it's true, we overtrusted IEBC to do their job. Of course, so many things went wrong, which we were aware of, but we chose to deal with them internally with IEBC with the hope that they will do what? They will they'll work on them. But again now, it becomes an issue of wire editors, and the way Linus has told you is that it comes a time when you have to make some very tough decisions when you look at these situations, because you come across information that is very, very terrible, and you wonder how it happened. For instance, there were very serious questions asked about even where the IEBC server was located. We are surprised that we were aware of this particular question, and in the case, the same question is being raised. Because the truth of the matter, IEBC servers ended up being where they were not, and we raised those questions. Two, there were even questions about where ballot papers were printed. Were they printed by one company? Those are some of the questions we asked. So, but because we wanted to crusade for a more credible IEBC, and that's why maybe we went a bit soft on certain issues.
Thank you, Hassan. Shall we hear the second last point?
Younger junior, a literature scholar. And for that note, allow me to 2 seconds in honor of the departed Chinua Achebe. Now let me pose this question to the media group. I'm not getting it, I'm forgetting the date, but it was during when the court arrived in Supreme Court to file the petition. And one student from the University of Nairobi and a journalist student was beaten, I don't know, shot by the police. The student was bleeding. All the media were there. but none of them, they covered the boy, but the boy was not, we didn't see the Daily Nation, it was not there on the TV. It was not the nation, but our papers.
Was that before the elections or related to the elections?
During the petition or the court petition. So the question I want to pose to the media.
Last week.
Yeah, the last week. So is there a group or the group that Okaten that control the information that you're giving to the people? It is only the Taifa Leo on page 2 on Sunday that covered the boy. All the media didn't cover that boy. Plus our local TV didn't cover that boy, but the boy was beaten. So are you? That is the question we put to the media on that note.
The question goes to Mr. Linus. You told us that when you are testing the BRBs for the IBC, 4 of them were not working, and you told us about the humidity or what to do. So my question goes this way. So if after you are confirmed that they were not working, as the media, you went ahead and also overtrusted the IBC, did you see that it was like a risk and you could have found another solution, or it was just, you did have to trust the media, the IBC? Because I think you could have, as media, you could have found another solution and also be prepared, because you are not sure with them. Thank you.
And this question is directed to probably the media and also Dr. Wolf. Maybe what was the implication of the legal development in terms of opinion polls that barred the juicy news of all those polls just before elections? Did that have an impact in terms of how you covered? That's the first question. Did it have impact on society and your coverage? Now, the part I want to do is to do my own inflection on this question of trust. Now, earlier on, a member of the audience raised a question of media consolidation and monopoly in Kenya. And we draw back on the lesson we had in 2007, when despite also what has been said was the question of stations announcing results, how do you reconcile the kind of tension build up to that? And so as we build on trust as a good basis, perhaps then we could ask ourselves, with whatever failures and shortcomings that came, what can be done going forward? Lastly, is that I think the last thing is, I think I will stop there in the interest of time. Thank you.
Now, just on the question of rejected votes, and this is my question, I went to all 4 interim presentations of observer groups 2 days after the election. They were all taking at face value, because they had, for whatever reasons, that the percentage of rejected votes was between 5 and 6%. And they gave reasons that from their observers on the ground as to how much difficulty voters were having with the colors of the ballot papers, and so on, and people standing in the queues for many hours being fatigued and so on. They gave all reasons as to why there were so many rejected ballots. We know after a day and a half, all those provisional results were thrown out. IEBC gave us a justification as to why those rejected ballots, because of computer bug and so on and so forth. Linus, did you have any of your correspondents on the ground in a position to report to you during those first day and a half that these figures that were being carried in the media and by all these observer groups could not be possibly right? And one other question, I know at least one media house was carrying its own totals from constituencies, which with only 23 constituencies left didn't have anything like the totals that were on the board. So that is also out of the question as to how that could have happened. And at what point would you, if you had an alternative finding from a polling station or a constituency, actually go on air and say the figures that Kenyans are being told are not correct? I'm not good at hypotheticals. I'm not a fortune teller. I'd be much richer than I am. However, on the Saturday of 23rd of February, I was getting worried that our polls that were released 10 days earlier might be, that the final results might not be within the margin of error. I spent 3 weeks down at the coast and so on and so forth, and I was worried about turnout. Just then the phone rang, and it was one of the editors of the Sunday Nation who called me and asked me if I would write a piece for the next day's paper, which I quickly did, and it's in the 24th of February issue of the Sunday Nation, where I was given 1,500 words to explain why I think it's very possible that our results could be different, mainly because of turnout, but also because an evaporation of the vote for the 6 minor candidates, which 60% of it did evaporate and so on. This is completely aside from any irregularities and so on. But my last paragraph, I invite you to read. And I said, having credible, accurate results from an electoral administration body are absolutely essential in order for us as pollsters to judge the accuracy of our work, but that is much less important than reestablishing in Kenya the main victim, with all due respect, of the election 5 years ago, which was the credibility of the electoral process itself. And it's a tragedy, and very sad to me as a non-Kenyan, that although we're waiting for a judgment, we're back in that same situation. So that was a substantive editorial control imposed on the commentator by somebody.
Thank you. Every media house has to actually try as much as possible and do have that. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of that, but indeed, yes, we had a tallying, our own independent tallying. The only thing I can point out right away is the huge difference between our tallying and the electronic returns, which were putting spoiled votes at the region of 300,000 plus. That was totally crazy. We don't know where that was coming from. Single source stories. We do have, this is a question from Nicholas, we do have a policy at the National Media Group that guides and governs the coverage of elections. It mainly emphasizes caution in terms of all the manner of information that comes your way. Have you double-checked? And this is general good practice in any good newsroom. Just handle the information with all the caution you can before releasing it. Professor Kimani had earlier spoken about media, and this came from Dr. Mashai, that the media, she may have misquoted me. Oh, okay. I hope she did. I hope she did, because she talked about lack of expertise on what happens, and then she also asked on the question of what happens when the media abdicates its role for a good reason. It's a very good question. But again, I take you back to the journey that the media has walked. I've covered 3 elections now. 97 was my first year in journalism, and I covered that. 2002, 2007, and then 2013. And we have seen progressive growth. Slow in some areas, but encouraging in a lot of them, which again then negates totally any argument that the media was compromised. I want to say journalists, a lot of journalists were not compromised. There are few media owners who may have behaved suggestively, but I don't think that really ended up reflecting in the editorial execution of duties in those media houses. Journalists are increasingly enjoying their space and protecting their space now than ever before. So it's very, very difficult even for media owners who would ordinarily want to meddle to actually rein in their own stuff. The question on the media not being able to ask questions on the day, again, I'm not going to deflect everything. Some accusations are spot on. I think the media did miss the opportunity, and in fact the turning point, when to recognize that things are not exactly going the right way. This is the time to rethink or review your trust of the IEBC. Things are not going the way they were supposed to go. That is why, for example, the team in Bomas of Kenya missed the moment. But I would say that's not the first time, which again goes down to the number of quality journalists we have in this country. There was a moment in State House some time back when President Kibaki held the only press conference he's ever called in State House to declare that he's got one wife. And Lucy told the journalist, "Nani na maswali? Uliza." Nobody asked a single question. So We can add that to the missed opportunities. Very, very low moments for our journalists.
I should have asked, you want to marry another one?
Now, the Supreme Court incident that the gentleman at the corner raises, I actually have no answer to that. Ordinarily, an incident that has happened has actually happened. And I don't see any reason or motivation by anyone, our station or any other, not to carry those images. But I remember we did cover the tear gas and a bit of people running away on that day. Maybe you missed in the process of changing channels. Keep it on the right channel the next time, and I'm sure you'll see it. Now, the issue of Billy raises the question of IEBC and what were we to do after that. It was very, very difficult for us to recover because there are a number of things, and I think Nyambura also asked the question, why did we trusted the IEBC? We trusted the IEBC because, seriously, all the stakeholders in the electioneering process who were alive in 2007 should have had the presence of mind not to do things the same way again. But what we are realizing is IEBC may just have done exactly the same things that the ECK did. We honestly didn't expect that. And in the process of that, we failed to put in place the checks that used to go with the ECK. What that required of us, for example, was to have many more agents in as many as possible polling stations. There were 33,000 polling stations. Only the IEBC had the capacity to actually man all those. For us, we could do a minimum, which is 290 constituencies, and we tried that. We actually did that. It wasn't possible to be in all the polling stations, and as you realize now from the court proceedings, the questions being raised are at polling station level. Right now there is retallying for 22 polling stations, not constituencies. So meaning again, even our measures were not sufficient to keep on check what is going on. I think, if I have not forgotten, the question of opinion polls that has been addressed by Tom. Yeah, so thank you very much, and thank you, Rayhab. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's quite often we agree with Dr. Mshai, but today we find ourselves in two different positions. But I don't think that there is a fundamental difference, really, because the question I'm asking myself is, how do people make decisions when faced with competing forces? You know, so you have the force of keeping the country together. You're a journalist. You have that force that points at you right there. You have read the crisis group report, which says that it is very likely that this country will explode. You have read all these reports that tell you that this country is actually going to the dogs. You also know that you have a responsibility as a journalist to be the public watchdog and to tell the story as you receive it, as you know it. How do you arrive at the decision? And that's why I was saying that it seems, at least to me, that there are moments when the watchdog role gets suspended temporarily for purposes, for other purposes, because of that competing, those competing energies that point to the journalist, and that's all I'm saying, really. And I'm saying that this competing situation was very manifest, you know, around election time, before, you know, the elections, as well as after 4th. That this, you know, that actually you do not, it's really not a binary opposition. It's really a much more complex situation. This is all I'm saying. And I'm saying that, you know, our journalists are very professional. However, there is still work to be done in terms of professionalizing the sector, and that there is need for the media owners to invest in investigative journalism, so that we can get the factual story. This is what I'm saying. And I also want, with regard to the dichotomy of peace and truth, because this is a discourse that actually needs to be discussed deeply in this country, because it keeps coming up. In my view, that binarity is actually very superficial. We really should be talking about sustainable peace. Sustainable peace is only achievable when there is truth and where there is justice. That is the way you do it. That you can never talk about sustainable peace without addressing issues of justice and truth. However, you can have a fragile peace, where justice and truth do not operate. You can have that moment of calmness, that moment of very, very fragile, which can allow you, for example, to address issues of truth and justice, knowing very well that this is very fragile, this can collapse anytime, but it allows you to activate the various structures, institutions and so on. But as an end in itself, very, very dangerous to assume that fragile peace should be an end in itself. And that is where we are at the moment, as a state of silence, as it were, very, very delicate and so on. So I'm really thinking in terms of those competing energies. Just one line. Who else must we bring about? Not just the media. I think that really we must bring more. We must bring civil society institutions, to tell us, for example, to what extent do they abdicate their role, so that this battle is widened. It's not just the media that are targeted as a sector. Yeah.
Thank you. I take notice that Rayhab allowed Linus to speak, to take her time. May I take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for finding the time to come and be a part of this very vibrant gathering. Of course, special thanks to our panelists, Linus Kaikai. You don't have to do the fighting, possibly after this. You'll not have the protection. You'll not have the protection of the chair. For that you did. But thank you nonetheless, Professor Kimani Njogu. This is not the first time, indeed, for yourself and for Linus to be here. Every time we see you guys, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for finding the time. And Rayhab, asante sana for making the time. And if you could kindly join me in giving him a round of applause. Asanteni sana. This is organized once every month, the last Tuesday of the month, by Media Focus on Africa. We hope to be here again next time. My name is Mburugu Gekunda. I've been your host. Hope to host you again sometime in the future. You are invited for tea, coffee, some snacks upstairs, not outside, because we've got some exhibition going on. I'm told that as you walk out towards the door, there's a staircase on the left. Kindly feel free to enjoy yourself, and let's have this interaction continue. Asanteni sana, karibuni.